So we have another great training that we're all really looking forward to. Before we can start with that, I just want to start by taking attendance. So if I call your name, you could just say here. I would appreciate that. So Lisa Ortiz, I'm the chair, I'm here. Gary Dean.
I'm here.
David Smith.
Here.
Martine Ennis Osario is here. Julie Evans.
Here.
Awesome. So Julie is here virtually. Anika Montgomery.
Here.
Great. Sasha Ridley is here. Gary Coffey here. And Jim Miller.
Here.
Is here.
I'm here.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So once again, we're so appreciative of all of the effort that the Arlington County Police Department puts into these trainings, and we really look forward to what you have in store for us today. So I'm just going to pass it off to Captain Chamberlain.
All right, today we're going to talk about ACPD policy, the formation, and once again, back with you is the famous.
You give me all the sexy topics. Report writing, policy. A wise man once said, policy never sleeps. Never figured out exactly what he meant by that. Anyway, so just a quick introduction. I know I spoke with most all of you last meeting. My name is Matt Martin. I'm a lieutenant with the police department. I have been with the police department for 20 years, and I'm currently assigned to the Office of Professional Responsibility. And one of the many hats I wear there is managing our policy. So updates to our policy, if new policies need to be implemented. There's been, as I'm sure you're all aware, a lot of changes in law enforcement in the last few years. And if we do something significant, we generally have a policy that guides our officers on how it's supposed to be done. So here's our agenda for the day. We're going to talk a little bit about our policy structure and how it's administered, and then we're going to go through policy, just an overview of how it's set up, the different sections, and then I'm going to highlight some of the higher profile policies that I thought you'd be interested in knowing about. As I said last time, I would love it if this was a conversation. So if you have questions along the way, please interrupt, ask me, and I'm happy to answer them the best I can. So the manual is divided into 5 parts. Next slide. And it's chapter 1 is the introduction, 2 policy, 3 organization administration. Those we generally don't deal with very much. Those don't really contain information that an officer might do something that would violate our policy. Those kind of lay out the authority behind the policy and the structure and organization of the department. The real meat of our policy is contained in the chapter 4, the 400s, which are rules and regulations, and then in chapter 5, which are the procedures. So chapter 5 is the in terms of content, is the largest chapter. That's the one where each section, like taser use, use of force, search and seizure, each of those have multi-page policies contained within them. Those are all found in chapter 5. We administer the manual through a program called Power DMS. One of the great things about that is it's accessible by any web-enabled device. So there's an app. You can also get to it through a web browser, so officers can access it from anywhere, from their department shoot phone, on their MDT, wherever they need to. They can access the most recent version of our policy. And Power DMS also includes a public-facing site. Has anybody ever gone and taken a look at our manual section online, on our policy manual online? So you can get to it through this link right here, or you can just Google Arlington County Police Policy Manual, and it will take you to right here. So this is what it looks like when members of the public go in and look at our policy. Another great thing about Power DMS is it archives past versions. So if we need to know what policy, what version, if a policy's been updated, we want to know what version of the policy was in effect on a certain date, we can find all those past versions. It tracks distribution of new or updated policies, so we can go in and look and see who is signed for it, who is acknowledged for receiving it, and who needs to do that. And it also has a training and testing component. So if we push out a new policy, and it's important enough that we don't just want people to read it, but we also want to give them a little test or a quiz or something just to make sure they're picking up on the important parts. We can do all that through Power DMS also. As I've already mentioned, OPR is responsible for maintaining and updating the manual. And policy revisions can occur for a number of different reasons. There could be a change in law. An important case law could be decided that changes the way we use a tool that we carry or something like that, and we would have to update our policy to reflect that. There could just be advances in police practices. You know, the entire law enforcement community could just find better ways to do things, and if that is not what our policy says, we need to go in and update it to reflect that. And then one of the things I think we do really, really well is we listen to our officers, right? So if we get feedback from the people who are actually doing this, and they're saying, hey, this policy just doesn't work, or, and this has happened before, the policy was written in a way that a tool that it talks about doesn't work that way. So we can't possibly follow policy because our in-car cameras don't work the way that they were written about, or something like that. We listen to our officers and we will adapt our policy to match that. When we draft a new policy or an updated policy, before it's ever published, part of the drafting process is I go out and I meet with people from across the department. I look for subject matter experts to make sure I'm talking about the topic intelligently, but I also want input from a lot of different levels, right? I think I'm pretty good at writing policy, but the more input, the better. So we listen to people. I convene work groups. We sit down and we just hand out drafts. And we just go through it. Does this work? Is there a better way to say this? Do you understand what it means when it says this? That's another big potential roadblock in policy. If something is written so there's 2 or 3 reasonable interpretations, then you're going to have people operating differently. That's not ideal. And then before it's published, when we have a final, what we believe to be a final draft, we put it into what's called a policy tracking system. And that pushes it out to all the command staff, so that's everybody of the rank of captains and above. But we've also put together a policy review team, which is a cross-section of the department, officers, corporals, all ranks, all different assignments. They also review it and give us feedback, which we, if it's reasonable and it makes the policy better, we will implement. So it's a real broad base of input before we update a policy. As far as how do we learn, how does an officer learn about our manual? It's extensive, it's hundreds of pages. So as part of their onboarding process, all new officers are assigned to review the policy. They have to go through the manual and electronically sign for every section. And then critical sections of the policy manual examples are use of force, firearms, kind of the high profile topics are trained more extensively. So when you go to firearms, part of firearms is learning what our policy is on the use of deadly force, use of firearm, proper safe storage of your firearm. All of that is covered in depth in particular specific trainings. Additionally, there's certain manual sections that were required by law to train annually. So Virginia requires that photographic and in-person lineups, it's required that officers receive training on that every year. And so we have that program in Power DMS. Once a year, it pushes out a little quiz, the policy to be reviewed, and then a quiz to make sure they're actually reading it. And that just happens automatically once a year. And then finally, when we do update a manual section, it's pushed out to all officers so that we can make sure they're seeing it. So this next slide here is just an example of what I just mentioned, the eyewitness and photo lineup. This is the quiz that is pushed out to officers. So they get an email telling them they have a task to do in Power DMS. The first thing they have to do is review the policy, and then they're presented with, I think it's a 10-question quiz, and it just highlights the action points from the policy. Right? Every policy like this that covers eyewitness identification, it tells officers how to properly conduct these things. And that's what we want them taking out. But, we have policy statements. It'd be great if they recognize that, but what we really want for them is to internalize how to do these things properly. So this is just a 4-question exam, 4 of the 10 questions example of the quiz that they have to do. And it's not about passing or failing. If they get one wrong, it's just, you got that wrong, what's the right answer? And you do it till they get all 10 right. So hopefully it's just reinforcing what they just read in the policy. So if you look at one of our policy sections, I mean, what does it actually look like? What are you looking at? So just going through these parts really quickly, that tells you this is 538.05, use of the taser, CEW. It tells you what chapter it's in. It's in chapter 5, the procedures. It gives you the effective date, so we know what. Click one more. There you go. So it puts the effective date in there, and so you know that this this version of this policy was effective as of February 15th of this year. Right next to that are past versions, so you can see every time it's updated, that February, if it were updated again, that February 15th date would go into the amend supersedes, and we would know all the past versions. Obviously, as time goes on and that gets bigger, we probably will just only keep the top 5 or 6 in there. But at least you know how many times it's undergone revision. We've got the chief's signature, which of course gives it the authority. Underneath the chapter are epilepsy standards. So I think I've mentioned before that we are accredited by the Virginia Law Enforcement Practices and Standards Commission, I think is what epilepsy stands for. Is it close? Yeah. I'm also in charge of that too. So we go through a process where we have several hundred proofs or standards we have to meet, and we have to show how we're meeting those. And so if a policy meets any epilepsy standards, those are cross-referenced right here, so we know for accreditation purposes where this applies. We of course have the title of the policy. Next one. And then the sections. So just about every policy manual section has a policy statement, definitions, if applicable, and then procedures. So that's just kind of how we structure it, and then the procedures are where we talk about exactly what officers, how they're supposed to do whatever topic we're talking about.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Just, kind of before we start diving down. So I guess it's more for you, Chief. Policy versus regulation. Can you tell me just the framework for how, I've seen there's some organizations use instructions, some use policy, some use regulation, but generally most things have policy. As you start this with the officers, I mean, is this rigid, or what's your overarching statement that says, hey, life, limb, safety, disregard, do the right thing, and then policy, is this, like, this isn't regulatory, is it?
No, it's just the policy of
It's
the
policy.
agency, but, each policy takes into account, and we try not to be too prescriptive where we don't have to, because every situation is different, but they are the rules of the agency. The policies apply to everyone from me to the person just hired and our professional civilian staff. So, it is expected that we operate within these policies.
Yes.
That doesn't mean there might not be a scenario where, what the officer did is maybe a technical violation, but at the end, it could be that it was the best thing to do.
Yes.
And we have to be able to understand and accept that. So we have the policy that guides the entirety of the agency. And, I think when you'll spend some time with it, I'm sure, and you'll see that it's not written we can't account for every scenario you're going to encounter. So it's broad, but it's broad parameters that are meant to be, informative for people to follow. We also have standard operating procedures, and that is by unit or section level, but that's not as nearly as overarching. It's like if the patrol section will have a standard operating procedure, but it's like, how do you request leave? It's not the big policy of the agencies. It's more, how do I operate within this work group?
Okay.
But whenever we investigate an officer's behavior or conduct, it's going to be based on the policy of the agency.
So the way I always explain it is policy is kind of like your highest level, your 30,000 foot view,
Yep.
right? So you have a policy that says all searches need to be documented. And then you'll have a standard operating procedure for patrol, standard operating procedure for CID. And patrol may say, well, you document your search in a case report, because that's what patrol officers write. And CIDs may say, document your searches in a case supplement or your detective supplement. So there's different ways to do it. So that's the next level down. And then we have what I call cheat sheets or go-bys, which are literally like, what buttons do I push to make those things happen? So that's how I always think of it, as a hierarchy. As a policy kind of tells you the overall way to do it. An SOP tells you specifically for your unit how to do it. And then if you don't know what buttons to push on whatever device you're using, you pull out your cheat sheet, and that is like, 1, do this, 2, do that. All right, so chapters 1 through 4, we'll go through these briefly. Chapter 1 is the introduction. It establishes the authority for the manual. It describes the manual's terminology, style, and how it's organized. It establishes that Power DMS is the method for storing. I think I'm probably the youngest one here in terms of joining the department, but even when I joined, we were given a 3-ring binder with, that thick that we were supposed to carry around with us. And if we needed to find a policy, we'd have to thumb through it or use the index. So it's just so nice now that on your phone you can pull up and instantly bring the policy up and refer to it. And then it also lays out a process for revising the manual, which is just basically OPR handles that process. Chapter 2 is titled Policy. It contains our mission statement, our core values, our goals, and then the law enforcement code of ethics. And the valuable thing about that is that way it's actually incorporated into our rules and regulations. It's one thing to have a sign up or have it posted on the wall. I think that's great that you look at it all the time, but this way it's officially part of our rules and regulations because it's incorporated into the policy. In Chapter 2, it emphasizes the value of deterring crime, apprehending offenders, recovering property, and maintaining order. So it kind of lays out why we exist, what we're here for, what we do. And then it talks a little bit about the department's views on service, what happens if someone asks for information, making sure that we have integrity, that we're courteous when we interact with people. Talks a little bit about community relations, and then keeping a good, non-toxic work environment. Did I skip a chapter? Oh, I did. I'm so sorry. Chapter 3 is organization. So that just lays out the. Here. Anyway, I remember writing it. Anyway, it's the org chart. It contains all the org charts. So it describes the ranks within the department. It has an org chart for each division. Has the organization of the department been explained to you yet? I don't want to.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so we've got the highest level are divisions, then sections, and then units. So it has an org chart for each division, and then it has a written description of every rank and every unit. Any unit that exists in the department has like a 1-paragraph description of it. So it could be a division that's described, a section, or a detective unit or a patrol squad. All of those have like a 2 to 3 sentence description in Chapter 3. Chapter 4 contains rules and regulations. So this is where we first start to see some of the stuff that actually tells officers what they can or can't do, or how you're going to be an Arlington County police officer. So this talks about reporting violations of law by other department members. So we are required by policy, if we are aware of a violation of law by another department member, we're required to report that. This is where we have our duty to intervene. So there was a law passed 2 years ago, I believe, on the state law that required every department to adopt a policy where officers have a duty to intervene when a use of force is unconstitutional. So we've actually put that into our policy, both here and I believe it's in the use of force section also. Chapter 4 covers personal appearance. Can you have tattoos? If you can, where can they be? What can the content be? What facial hair can you have? It emphasizes the importance of confidentiality, that if you learn information through this job that is supposed to be kept confidential, you do that. It talks about respecting constitutional rights, and then also has a provision in there where you must identify yourself to the public. So this is not all encompassing. I've just pulled out some of the things that I thought you would be interested in, and then talk a lot about how we interact with the public. This is one I wanted to highlight particularly. So section 414.00 is personal contacts. This is, you're welcome to read it, but this basically tells officers that they need to treat people with respect. And if we receive a complaint that an officer was discourteous on a traffic stop or on any interaction with the members of the public, this is the code, policy section that we would be investigating them for potentially violating. All right, so from here on, I've pulled, I think it's four or five of the 500 sections, just again to highlight for you all. And the first one I wanted to go over is 531.06, bias-free policing. And I pulled out the policy statement just so you can read it. Again, this is, if you remember, the top part. This kind of lays out the statement of the department on whatever topic we're talking about. So this is the department's internal policy statement on bias-free policing. Of course, making it clear that we're committed to unbiased policing. Talks about investigative detentions, traffic stops, arrests, searches, property seizures have to be done based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause in accordance with the Fourth Amendment, and cannot be based on anybody's personal characteristics. Any questions on the policy statement? Further on in the policy, it defines bias, bias-based policing, and stereotype. It makes it clear that an individual's race, color, ethnicity, national origin, age, religion, gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, mental or physical disability, or socioeconomic status cannot be a basis for any of these police activities down at the bottom, other than as a physical descriptor. Obviously, things like age, race, ethnicity could be helpful in identifying somebody if we have a witness description. But other than that, they cannot be the basis for any of the police activities you see down at the bottom.
Okay, Martin, you said, like, if a complaint, then, we could look at these things. In the absence of a complaint, let's just say just more your internal daily operating, do you have some mechanism, whether it's through the, person at the desk, or, how do you guys debrief just a standard thing that doesn't rise to the level of a complaint? Do you have an internal mechanism?
This would be like if a fellow officer observes some behavior. Yeah, so that would be brought to the attention of a supervisor who could then determine how that's best handled. Is it something that is a counseling session or requires additional training, or is it a violation of policy that needs to be formally investigated? I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, so just in the, because not everything rises to complaint,
Right.
obviously. So just in the normal course, standard week, whatever, something happens. It sounds like that officers have the ability to, on their own, if they see something they don't like, is it more one-on-one, or, how do you guys?
It really depends on what the behavior is.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's significant enough, I have every confidence it would be brought to the attention of a supervisor. If it's something where, at the end of a traffic stop, someone was just, grumbled a little bit, and another officer was there and said, hey, you should have wrapped that up a little more politely than you did, it could be handled that way too. We're not robots, obviously,
Yeah.
right? So there's no tipping point where it's just beep boop, we've triggered a complaint, we go up. It really depends on what the situation is.
This is a real delicate topic, because now you're starting to get into culture.
Yeah.
Organizations, and so far I've been really impressed with everything I've seen. I don't know what the rest of the people here, but I think this is kind of the core thing, because most things start small, and people kind of do that. I'm not talking here, but this topic is how do people police themselves versus waiting for something to happen.
And I think I said this to you all last time. Policy is important, but it doesn't trump culture, right? Culture is the far more important thing, because you can have all the policies, and the most corrupt organization you can think of in the world probably has a policy that says don't do what the corrupt people are doing, right? So culture is important. And one of the things that, I started with the department as a civilian employee, and one of the reasons I wanted to become a police officer here, and I would not have become a police officer anywhere else, is because the culture of the department is just that it doesn't tolerate this behavior. It just doesn't. If something were to happen in Arlington, I have every confidence that it would be brought to the attention of whoever it needs to be brought to the attention of, because it's just not going to be tolerated.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I noticed that this particular policy is one that has a mandatory reporting element to it.
Yep.
I think you kind of alluded to it in your presentation and even answering some of your questions, but just to kind of maybe wrap it up into a little package, right? What factors do you all consider, or what are some important considerations that you all take into account when determining which policies are going to have mandatory reporting attached to them? And if there were any particular ones around this particular policy that you would be able to share, I'd love to hear that.
I don't know how that has evolved over the years about which ones have it in it and which ones don't.
Well, I think for this statement, one of the things as part of the evolving of this policy, because this policy name has changed, And how we've gone about reviewing that information has changed over the years as well. But I think it was just very important in terms of bias in itself, that if you identify it, because it's also part of Brady, when it comes down to bias, and that was important, that if you see it, you must tell us about it. So it's not, that is, because we have another issue here outside of it just being a policy violation. So I think that to me, puts that level of severity a little higher than any other policy that we may have. It's just like our compliance to laws. Obviously, it's a compliance to laws. That is something that you must report as well.
I think there's a policy that sort of says that everybody's expected to report any policy violation. I mean, so, if I'm following Wayne and he's going 3 miles over the speed limit, that's, it's not something I'm going to run a report or address. But, my experience has been in the 3 decades I've been here, and, at least half of that I've been involved where I've either been in internal affairs or know what's happening. The overwhelming majority of the things that lead to significant discipline are generated from within, whether it be a supervisor or a coworker that's bringing it to the agency's attention. I think that speaks to culture because, we don't have people that want to work side by side with somebody who's not doing the right thing. And, I think that's an important thing for me and for us is that, I think everybody would agree that the most substantial things that we've dealt with over the years have generated from within.
Yes.
And every year we do an annual internal affairs report, and the number of investigations generated internally is normally substantially higher than the number of citizen complaints that we get.
That's helpful. So it sounds like there's a general culture and expectation that all policy violations are reported, but ones that rise to like a particular legal requirement or something of that nature might be like explicitly articulated in that policy. And Brady, I don't know how many people are familiar with.
We're going to go through that next session.
Okay, perfect.
Also biased, any potential allegation of violating this policy is one of the enumerated policy violations that are investigated by OPR. So potential allegation of this would not be handled by a patrol supervisor, for example. So any questions on bias-free policing, that manual section? The next one we wanted to talk to you about is 53605, transporting and processing in custody arrestees. The policy statement for this one emphasizes the need to keep both officers and arrestees safe. It establishes procedures for handcuffing arrestees and searching them, obtaining medical care for arrestees. And I think one of the things that we impress upon our officers very early on is when you arrest somebody and you take them into your custody, or even if you have them in custody because they're under an ECO, emergency custody order for mental health treatment. Once they are in your custody, you are fully responsible for them. So you're responsible for their well-being. That whether it's having to use the bathroom, they can't get up and go use the bathroom because you have them in handcuffs and you have control over them. If they have an injury or other medical condition, they can't go get treatment for that like they can because they are in your custody. So we emphasize very early on that this person now is yours and you have to be responsible for their well-being, and that means obtaining medical care for them if they need it. It talks about how we're going to transport people to the jail or the police station, what vehicle can be used to transport arrestees. It talks this third from the bottom. What happens when you realize that you've arrested somebody and they're the wrong person? Maybe a witness said that's the person, and you arrest them and you were fully right in everything you did, but then somebody dressed exactly the same way walks out, or you review a video or whatever and you realize that's not the person, right? So we lay out a process for what we call unarresting somebody, releasing them from custody. This is before they get booked. If it's after they get booked, there's a whole nother process, because now a warrant's been issued and we have to make sure that's withdrawn appropriately. But this is what happens if you, during the course of your investigation, you've arrested someone and you realize that they shouldn't have been arrested. So we lay out a process for that. It talks about responding to someone who escapes from custody, and then it also discusses how we want people to serve arrest warrants. Any questions on arrestees? Search and seizure, this is a relatively new policy. This one only went into effect, I believe, roughly 2 years ago. It's a standalone policy that talks about the proper way to conduct various searches and seizures. It of course requires that searches and seizures be reasonable and in line with Fourth Amendment, state law and case law. As we talked about earlier, it requires that officers document all searches and seizures, and that searches and seizures be based on specific articulable facts and not the same personal characteristics that we talked about earlier in bias-based policing. And then the procedure section talks about searching people with a different gender than the officer making the arrest. So our policy on that, in case you're curious, is that you should try to get an officer there of the same gender, but it's not required. Some departments require it, we don't. We say that's preferred, but if it's impractical, then you can do what we call a cross-gender search, so male officer, female arrestee, but that has to be witnessed, so you have to have a second officer there with you, and of course now we all have body cameras and those would all be on while that's occurring. Lays out procedures for how we want officers to execute search warrants, how to conduct a proper consent search, so that would be asking someone permission. You don't have a reason to search someone under probable cause, so you ask if you can search. It lays out when you can do that and how you should do that. Searching under plain view. Is anybody here familiar with the plain view doctrine? So plain view in a nutshell is if you can see something illegal, contraband, or evidence of a crime, and if you have a legal right to be in that place, then you can go and get it without a warrant. So the easiest one to explain is in a vehicle. So if I can look through the window of a vehicle and I see obvious kilos of cocaine in the vehicle, I can go in and get it because there's another doctrine that says I don't need a warrant to search a car if I have probable cause. So if I look through a window and there's obvious evidence or contraband there and I have a right to be in that place, I can just go in and get it. So we lay out the rules for following the plain view doctrine. Talks about conducting searches instant to arrest, so everybody who gets arrested and taken into custody, they get searched, obviously, because they're going into the jail, which is a secure facility, so they all get searched. Pat downs during Terry stops. I don't want to turn this into a patrol legal class, but Terry stops are when you stop someone because you suspect them of committing a crime, you don't have probable cause yet, you're not necessarily at that moment have enough information to arrest them, but you have enough to detain them while you further your investigation. And if you have reasonable suspicion that they are carrying a weapon, you're allowed to conduct a limited search of their outer garments to make sure that they are not carrying a weapon. That's called a pat down. It's not a full search, it's a limited search. And we lay out in this procedure, or in this policy, how to do that. We talk about searching during exigent circumstances. So if there is an emergency where somebody's at risk of being hurt, there are times where we can search that we would not be allowed to if we didn't have exigent circumstances. We lay out the procedures for strip searches and body cavity searches. These are extraordinarily rare, but they're obviously fraught with potential issues. So we have very specific procedures about how those types of searches are to be conducted, and then doing what's called a protective sweep. So if we go into a house for a domestic violence call, let's say, and we have some reason to believe there may be other people in the house, we can do a quick check just to make sure that no one's going to burst out of a back bedroom and attack us. So it's not looking for evidence, it's not looking for contraband, it's just making sure that there's no risk to us as we're conducting our investigation. Any questions on searches and seizures?
When you said this is fairly new, what was in place before this?
So this was all kind of spread out throughout the manual section.
Okay.
So in
now
the
you kind of-
arrestee section, we probably had something about searching instant to arrest. In investigations one, we may have had something about a search warrant, but we just decided to compile it and put it all in one place, so it's easier to follow.
And of all these, if this is the whole list, is there some of them that you get more complaints on than other ones?
You don't get a lot of complaints.
You don't get a lot of complaints from citizens?
No searches.
No, not
Okay.
for searches. Was that the last one? Wow. I was having so much fun, I thought there was more. Yeah, so again, that's just a quick introduction to our manual, how it's organized. and then a highlight of some of the manual sections we thought you'd be interested in. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, my contact information is on here just like the last time, and I'm happy to help out with anything, any other questions you might have.
Lieutenant, I might key up a question, just a little context. When I went through Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, one of the training courses that really stuck with me was around policy, internal policy. The whole purpose of this course over, I think it was several hours long, a couple days, was about how when you go from constitutional right all the way through the continuum to federal, state, and then local policy, that it can get really messy at times and put law enforcement officers in dangerous situations. And then he carefully goes over this list of and shows examples through history, recent examples of when policy internally put law enforcement officers at risk and killed themselves or got themselves killed or other people killed or other officers killed. And it reminded me a bit of the May 2015 fatal officer or the officer involved shooting here in the county when the taser deployment was used, right? And then the ricocheted off and hit, I think his partner,
Buckingham.
was that right?
Buckingham, where
Yeah,
two
at the
officers-
door.
Right,
it was
two officers at the door, his.
two officers in the door, one takes the other.
And when he tased the other one, so the suspect had a deadly weapon in hand, and the idea was to go to the taser first, and then ended up ricocheting off and hitting, his partner. So my point is when something like that happens, what are the conversations like in policy to say, hey, is this something we need to change, and how often does that happen? You started out by saying you go through policy often.
Yeah, I mean, we
Something
tweak
like,
policy all the time, usually not for obviously such significant incidents as that. I don't know that there was a policy that contributed to that.
Mhm.
Actually, I wasn't in the office at the time, but yeah.
I would just say for a situation like that, there's the tactical piece.
Yeah.
And then there's the policy piece. So the tactical piece for that was based upon the officer's positioning and the situation presented. That officer felt as if a taser deployment right then was a reasonable use of force to, subdue the suspect and hopefully de-escalate from there. And unfortunately, because of the dynamics that evolved in the movement of the people, you had a ricochet, hit his partner. That officer is then kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of put on the bench for a second as he gets himself back together, and then the situation escalates as the suspect actions become more aggravated and egregious and dangerous, and the officer escalates the use of force. So that would be, I think, more of a tactical probably transition than a policy transition, where there's no departmental policy or training that we would have that would say you have to use a taser prior to using a firearm in a use of force situation. So the old, I don't want to go into use of force so much, but I think probably when all of us went through the academy, the use of force model was a ladder or a stair step,
right.
where you kind of went through. And the problem with that mentally for officers is that in their head, they have to do step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Whereas if I get out of a vehicle and the first thing that I'm confronted with is a suspect pointing a firearm at me, I'm not gonna, do officer presence, verbal commands, spray him with mace, taser him, hit him with my ass, try and punch him, and then use my firearm. I'm going to use the most appropriate use of force based upon the threat that's presented. So we've gone to kind of a circle model now, which is essentially the officer in the middle with a variety of tools around them. Then the threat that presents himself on the outside of that circle, the officer can kind of transition in or out of any of those use of force options as needed. But that's not necessarily our policy states that will follow, training and law and all that. But there's no directive to use this this type of force specifically before going to this type of force, because that would hamstring the officer, and you could end up in a situation where you're not able to do what you need to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and thanks for that explanation. And it's good to kind of talk a little bit maybe about how tactics can inform, how policy can inform tactics, and potentially vice versa, right? Especially after incidents.
So
Because that can
not
get
to,
lost a little bit, I
Yeah.
think, in conversation, points.
so not to steal the thunder from October 15th, but a lot of the tactical pieces you'll get from that conversation. We do have an opportunity in the midst of completing any type of administrative investigation or review into an action taken by an officer or lack of action taken by an officer is to determine if it's a policy failure. So when we look at the policy failure, when we review those incidents, then we'll identify where the policy is, what the failure is, and we're gonna wanna get that corrected as soon as possible.
So that can happen as part of any administrative investigation, but it routinely comes up from, Matt and his shop, but also throughout the agency, people will identify a policy tweak that needs to be considered and push it forward. So we talk quite a bit about policy, and it can come from any host that starts the conversation about it. And we do have them coming from, line level staff who see something that could be different or better, and we engage in the conversation from that point to our official reviews and our accreditation and our investigation. So, a general discussion about any of our policies can start for any number of reasons.
And then another thing is when you talked about, the hierarchies of federal law, state law, working its way down. One of the things that I strive to do is to make sure that any conflicts along that way there aren't any, if they can be. If our policy is attempting to follow state law or federal law, I do everything I can to write it so that it's crystal clear, so there isn't creating some sort of misunderstanding gap where, well, my training is that the case law says this, but our policy says that. I try to line them, and we are very, very good about putting the sources for this right into our policy. So if there's a state law that we're trying to reflect, we will actually put a hot link in the policy to that state law. So the officer can just click on it and go right to it and read that source him or herself.
Before we leave policy, just the context of the COB and our role, the training we're receiving. So make sure I'm kind of in my own mind piecing this together. So generally, we as a COB will not really be involved in policy or even suggestions of policy unless there is a investigation, right? I mean, if we're doing our own independent investigation and we want to propose policy changes, here again, don't have to implement them, but I think that there could be some situations that, knock on wood, we hope we never get used. Don't want me, well, you never have used it. But I'm just talking about why we're here. I mean, we're here because the county has us that if something happens, that we conduct our own independent investigation, and a part of that could include policy recommendations.
Yeah.
Right?
I believe
So,
that's right.
so normally that would be the only time we would, I'm sorry?
No, so under ordinance, you kind of have two or kind of three, depending on how you look at it, kind of things. One is independent investigations and sort of the oversight of, officer actions. The second component is policy and policy recommendations to the county board. And the third, which kind of falls into policy, is budgetary.
So under the second, go ahead.
The piece about policy is the recommendations that they can make to us about a policy.
Yeah.
Because the board.
Exactly. So
The board does not do our policy.
So they don't, I'm sorry, you're totally correct. You make recommendations to ACBD about policy, and ACBD basically responds to
Out of an
you.
independent investigation.
But I think we could do.
Not necessarily out of an
That's,
investigation,
that's what I wanted to,
outside of an investigation.
okay, and that's what I
But
wanted to get at.
could it not be
You could
as a
generate from
result
investigation.
of an
maybe.
investigation?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
So, but it doesn't have to be with,
Yeah.
because of an investigation.
Absolutely.
Okay. Just because we see something, I don't know how that would work, but yeah, that's my understanding, that we
Yeah, we
could
can-
suggest something.
It does, the ordinance does allow for you to review any policy that's available to you, and you can make suggestions or comments in regards to it. It does not necessarily mean that those comments will be acted upon, but it is a recommendation. Maybe it's some oversight or undersight of us, or we'll be able to offer an explanation to why it's written that way, just to give you clarification as well. So it kind of works a little bit of both ways, but you do have the ability to review and make recommendations and comments as well.
Yeah, and I would refer you also to the county code section that does lay out sort of the process through which you would make recommendations, the process that Captain Chamberlain just described about making a recommendation and then sort of getting clarification or response
So one thing that we did not hit on is prior to any policy, especially when there's one that has a liability to it, such as our use of force policy or your bias-free policy, anything that has any level of liability, which that is a large majority of our policy, we also have the county attorney's office take a review of that as well. So one of those reviewing elements is they will review it to see if they see anything as well. Just another set of eyes. So that typically is where our reviews take place, is also with them.
This is Julie. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was trying not to interject, but I was really interested in Chief Penn's comment about there being more internally reported, issues than necessarily external reports or complaints. And so I think that, finding can sort of feed into some of our approach to, policy recommendations may result from an investigation, but may come from like some of this understanding, the training insights and the questions and understanding more about where the policies come from and hopefully continued ride-alongs, because I've certainly gotten more insight, into officers' perspectives and needs. And so I think that all sort of fits together. And my question was for Chief Penn about, are those internal affairs annual reports something that we could have access to review?
Sure. They're publicly
public.
available.
Yeah, they're on the website.
Yep. We can send them.
Oh, they're public.
Yeah.
I see. Got it. Oh, that's excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we need a break or you want to press through and then take a break after the next one?
Yeah, so the way we laid it out was before we moved to the closed session and the visit to the ACPD offices, we were going to take a break then. So unless anybody feels they really, we'll just keep it.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Put out a couple other things. You guys can just kind of peruse what you want. If you guys want to keep the whole these as a group and pass them around throughout the next couple months or whatever while you're working on this board, you're welcome to do that. I have several copies, or if you want to cut them again, I do that too.
So you guys, I think most of you met Captain Giroux,
Thank you.
the most patient captain we have here that will allow himself to be pushed to another day.
Not a problem.
You're the best.
So I'm here to talk about wellness. It is an issue of significant, or issue of great personal significance to me, because the reason I got involved in it, the police department, was because one of my friends on the police department died by suicide. And because of my assignment at the time, which was actually OPR, that is the mechanism in the department that responds to those incidents. It was an out of jurisdiction death, and we are the ones who go to that because of the sensitive nature of all the other things we do. That falls upon us. So that was incumbent upon me to do that, and as a extension and result of that, I became very involved with wellness for our department and other departments. We'll also be talking a lot about that tonight. But I titled this presentation "Well Cops, Well Community" because I would proffer to all of you that if you do not have well cops providing services, you will not have a well community, right? If we're not operating from the best physical, emotional, behavioral, and mental platform that we can, we're not going to be providing good service, and that's not going to be positive for the community. So I would kind of throw out to you as a parallel, look at all of the resources that are offered to professional sports teams to hit a ball with a stick, or throw a ball in a basket, or throw a touchdown, or hit a hockey puck into a goal, and compare that to the resources that are offered to police and other first responders. And the discrepancy there is significant. And I'm gonna say that my wife works in professional sports, and I'm gonna say it's a lot more important for us to go to what we do than it is in the ball stick. So just kind of have that as a backdrop as we go through some of these discussions. So real quick, I'm a Mass native. Yes, I'm a Patriots fan. No, I don't think Tom Brady purposely overplayed football. Emory University down in Atlanta for my bachelor's degree. I got a master's at GW, started working here quickly thereafter. I've been an Arlington resident my whole time here. I'm married, I have no kids. And like any officer who's been on the department for that long, I've served in a variety of assignments and capacities, from patrols to community policing. I was on our plainclothes unit. I've worked in OPR, was vice, and I've had a variety of topics that I've worked both as an instructor in and provided presentations on both law enforcement and non-law enforcement audiences locally and nationally as well. And I mentioned the loss of my friend earlier. So one thing, as we all age and we go to the doctor always tells you to know your numbers, right? Know your blood pressure, know your cholesterol, all that type of stuff. Know your BMI so you can track your health. So whenever we're talking about law enforcement suicide, I think it's very important to know what the numbers are and track them. And I get very irritated when I listen to presentations and the presenter has obviously not kept up with the data. And they're either presenting it as more problematic than it is or less problematic than it is. So 2017, Ruderman Family Foundation, Massachusetts-based foundation. I have nothing, no connection to them, other than reading the literature that they provide in their final report on the research project they did. Their primary focus is issues of interest to members of the Jewish faith or individuals who have disabilities. So they became involved in a research project on first responder suicide, specifically in police and fire. And those are the numbers they came up with in their study, which was 140 police suicides versus 129 police line of duty deaths, and 103 fire and EMS suicides versus 93 line of duty deaths. So on both of those career paths, the threat of suicide is greater than dying in the line of duty, which is a significant fact.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a clarification? Is that nationally? Is that Massachusetts?
That is national.
That's just,
yes.
That's nationally. Okay,
Yes,
I
that's
just wanted to, since 2017.
That was 2017.
That seemed pretty low.
Yep. And I'll update.
It was from 27. So that's just in 2017.
Yes, that was
Okay.
when they published
I
this
got
stuff.
that. That makes sense. Okay.
So updated some of this, just going to track what's going on and pull in some other data. So in 2019, there were 237 law enforcement officer suicides that we know of. And a couple backdrops to that stat. So number one is the organization that begins tracking that is Blue Help. That's the name. It's now called First Help. Back then it was Blue Help. It's founded by a woman named Karen Solomon, whose husband is actually a Massachusetts state trooper. And she begins gathering this data. So it's self-reported data. And there is some conjecture that that data is underreported both on the police side and the fire side by as much as 40%. But what we know of self-reported is that there were 237 law enforcement officer suicides in 2019 in comparison to 158 line of duty deaths. The 158 line of duty deaths, these are all national numbers, and this is all causes, the 158. Car accidents, drownings, heart attacks, shot by a criminal suspect, stabbed, all those things. So I separate out for purposes of these presentations, because it usually gets the most attention, the number of people shot and killed by a criminal suspect. So in that, the 2019, 51 were shot and killed by a criminal suspect versus 237 who died by suicide. So you're almost you're about 4.5 times as likely to die at your own hand as you are to be shot and killed by a criminal suspect. Go to 2021, 157 law enforcement officer suicides, so significant dip there, significant increase in the line of duty deaths, which is due to what do we think for 2021? COVID, right? So a lot of law enforcement officers died of COVID due to the prevalence of the pandemic here in the States. Of those, I guess about 10% end up being people who were shot and killed by a criminal suspect. So again, we're about 2.5 times as likely to die at our own hand as we are to be shot and killed by a criminal suspect. Year to date, as of June, which is when I first developed this presentation for Latasha, 65 law enforcement officer suicides versus 124 line of duty deaths. 26 of which were shot by a suspect. So again, over about 2.5 times as likely to die during a short shot killed by someone. Other information that came out from this study and a couple others, police officers witnessed 188 critical incidents during the course of their career. Each and every one of those would be something that for a normal person would be impactful possibly for the rest of their lives. Could result in PTSD, could result in long-term depression or anxiety or some other mental or emotional health response. And at a certain point, my offer to you would be like, once I've witnessed a certain amount, that number becomes irrelevant. So it's not like I've only seen 126, so it's not that bad for Dave Giroux, but Latasha saw 130, that really kind of put her over the edge. That number is a very flexible number. I may experience one incident that is completely debilitating to me personally. Someone else may be exposed to a whole host of incidents across their career and not be as impacted for a variety of reasons. The PTSD and depression rates amongst first responders are up to 5 times higher than the same rates in the civilian population. Only 3 to 5% of police departments in this country have a suicide prevention program. That number is increasing, I would say, because I think the wellness component of most public safety employers has become more robust, but it's certainly still lacking to obviously. This survey took place in August of 2020, so in the height of COVID and in the height of the socio-political unrest following the George Floyd incident. And this was done by Dr. Michelle Lilly. She's out of Northern Illinois University. I met her at a presentation we did out in Austin, Texas for dispatchers. And she, subsequent to that, called us up and said, I want to do a very brief turnaround survey to gauge the impact of the current events and the current state of affairs on officer mental health. So she runs a 2-week survey nationwide. She gets about 1,400 responses. And in that, she determines that 47% of that data sample screened positive for PTSD using the primary care PTSD screen from the DSM-5, which is kind of the Bible, the diagnostic Bible for psychology and mental health issues. That's 9 to 10 times greater than the general population. Almost a third of that sample were in the moderate to very severe range of anxiety. That's about twice as great as it is in the general population. And over a third are in the moderate to very severe range of depression, which is 5 times greater than the general population. So Arlington officers did participate in this study, and I will tell you there was a large population of Virginia officers because she cast the survey out. She did not get as much response as she wanted. She contacted us. We cast it out internally and in the region, and speaking with her a couple of days later, she said that her response rate had gone up greatly. So we got a good response sample from this agency, from this region. Furthermore in that, she went more into depth in kind of how officers are perceiving their job based upon everything that was going on in society at the time. So 63% report that recent events had impacted their work productivity on a daily or weekly basis. 6 out of 10 say that they're feeling trapped or hopeless about their job in law enforcement on a daily or weekly basis. That to me is very significant. Over half say that they consider quitting their job in law enforcement on a daily or weekly basis. We're obviously seeing kind of the back fallout of that now. Almost 7 out of 10 say they would be unlikely to recommend a job in law enforcement to others as a career choice, and only not even 2 out of 10 say that they're going to be likely to recommend a job in law enforcement to others seeking employment. Almost 4 out of 10 say that their department does not provide adequate mental health services, and an additional 8% indicate that they prefer not to respond. So what this 8% says to me is that officers in those agencies are concerned about that information getting back to their department. So they are self-electing not to respond to that because they're afraid somehow this anonymous survey is going to result in some sort of retribution against them by their employer.
So can I just clarify again? So this was in 2020. This was
in August of 2020, so just a little over 2 years ago.
Okay, so this was after George Floyd?
After George Floyd and the middle of COVID.
And the middle of COVID. Okay, so I mean, obviously these numbers are tough, but it was a tough time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have there's a survey going on now that hopefully we'll get results from. There's some local results, there's some state results. We're waiting for the national report to come out. And that was an all services survey similar to one I'll be showing you in a minute. So police, fire, dispatch, and corrections. That was put out nationally. They got about 12,000 responses for that. They're just collating the data. It's being run out of the University of Florida. So that should be out soon. That'll provide kind of hopefully an updated view of that information.
I think I just want to point out one thing is that while this may have been in 2020, I think the most important thing is that where he said people were struggling with continuing with their employment as being a police officer, they have stuck with that concept in regards to retention. So I think that's the most important part to draw from that there was a lot of truth that we are seeing take effect today.
And you're going to see some survey results now that will be prior to COVID and George Floyd. So kind of a little compare and contrast.
Did you see any correlation between this and recruiting in the same time? As far as the front end, have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at in 2021, we had 1,000 people apply for police officer positions, and that number was significantly down. Of the 1,000, only 300 ever engaged beyond just filling out an application, and of that, we hired 41. This year, as of mid-September, we are around 550 applications. So the numbers are still down.
Yeah, so there's a correlation.
But I think when I was on my ride along, or perhaps we spoke about this, I can't remember. It does feel like there's a shift in the way that younger people view their lifetime employment. So there's a lot of jumping around, a lot of where, I wouldn't have, I haven't done that. And a lot of us who are a bit older may have not done that. But so I don't know that it's certainly law enforcement is having a problem because of that, but I think it's a national trend, or it looks like it's a national trend. I don't know.
While I would agree with you fundamentally in terms of that age group and maintaining and staying at a job 30, 40 years, I also think the other point to that is within Arlington and in this profession, a lot because of the esteem that we hold within the federal law enforcement, you would see that people would stay in law enforcement. We're not seeing people stay in law enforcement, which is the piece that's concerning.
But you don't think it's because, again, we're in a funny place where there's a lot of turnover in the labor market. Labor unemployment is really low right now. You don't think it might be because of that? Do you think it's a longer trend? Do you think you may continue to see this even when the unemployment rate is not quite as low as it is currently?
I don't think any of us can say that we see a change in the positive as of right now with anybody.
We're hoping for it.
Yeah, we're hoping for it, but
61% of the people who resigned in 2021 left the profession of law enforcement for us. So it's a big number.
During my ride along, I know I was hoping we would get on a conversation together and share stories, but I experienced it, and people love law enforcement. The thing in their heart that made them want to be a public servant is there, but there were some various reasons of why they wanted to ship, hey, Amazon, it was from wages in Arlington, high rent district, all the way to all these other things that you see here. But I did see more than once, I only did 3 ride-alongs, but the conversations that it would get in, not so much this officer, but things they're seeing.
Right.
In the force, because I said, hey, we want to help, we're not just here to, look at, see if your shoes are shiny, whatever, but hey, we're interested in the county. But I think some of the things that I see here, I heard verbalized.
Sure. So this next set of data is from a study that was done back in 2017. It was a Virginia State study. It's only Commonwealth of Virginia. It was about 4,800 respondents. It was 19 agencies. Arlington was one of the only jurisdictions where police, fire, and dispatch all responded. Only 3 other jurisdictions beside us had that happen. So I'll give you guys some data from that. The color code is very clever. Blue is police, red is fire and gold is dispatch for simplicity purposes.
Speak to the audience.
So we knew it'd be so much of cops, we figured we'd keep it simple for them and present it as data. But it's very, so as we do this stuff starts to get pretty interesting. So how many years have you been with the department? So if you look at this for police, 46% of the respondents had 15 years or more. And then add another 23% to that, you have around almost 70% are 11 years or more. So we anticipated this group down here being really high, and then it really tapering off and almost being nothing down here. And we found the majority of it were actually on the back end of their careers when we totaled up. So that was kind of surprising, because usually the older, crustier cops, for lack of a better term, tend to be less willing to respond to surveys. They're very resistant. They don't want to be, that's a clinical term. They don't like surveys. They don't want to respond. They're very hesitant and skeptical of them, but we found a very good response rate for this. So our response rate at the department, at the time, I think we had around 350 officers on staff. We had over 220 officers respond. So that's a very, very high for a response rate for a survey, for any survey. That's really good. For a bunch of cops doing that, it's spectacular. So this gets into some of the more specific criteria as to what officers were experiencing. So if you have changed for the worse, in what way? So one out of four say they're more confrontational. Over half say they're more irritable or agitated. 80% say they're more cynical. 1/3 say they're more withdrawn, and a quarter say they're depressed or anxious. So, in kind of quasi-joking terms, when we're making up our party list of people we're going to invite to spend time with at our house, we are not going to make a list of, gee, let's see, I'm going to have people over for, a fire pit, maybe outdoor TV with a ball game on this weekend. I think I'll hook up with my most confrontational, irritable, and agitated, cynical, withdrawn, depressed, or anxious buddies and really have a good time, right? So I say that jokingly, but in serious manner, all of this stuff comes home, right? So it's not just how they're presenting themselves at work, it's how they're presenting themselves at home and how they're interacting with their families, their neighbors, and other community members in their neighborhood. So if I'm experiencing being confrontational, that impacts my kids, right? My kids don't want to be around me. My wife has known me, we went to kindergarten together, she's known me since I was 5, so I tell her there's no way at this point she can say she didn't know what she was getting. That's a nonsensical argument, but certainly there have been times when she has not wanted to be around me based upon my response. It's just stuff going on at work or dealing with certain situations at work. The cynical piece to me is kind of a natural extension of our profession, right? As we go through our work life as a police officer, we're dealing with people who lie to us, who provide false information, who are trying to deceive us. So it becomes skeptical and cynical. That's not necessarily a problem, but certainly, becoming more over half becoming more irritable, agitated, and combining that with 24% being more confrontational on the street, interacting with a citizen group, that can lead us to a very negative outcome, right? Whether it's just in personal interaction or use of force. And then the becoming more withdrawn, depressed, or anxious, that tends to lead to substance use. And we know when we combine substance use and isolation, that usually leads to suicide. That's how I get into a dark place that I cannot get out of, and I don't feel there's any other response or outcome that's going to be suitable for me but to take my own life. Those are the scenarios that we've had here in Arlington and throughout the region. Booze and isolation is a very toxic combination for people if they're not able to.
Did you also break these down, by age or by how many, cross-reference this along with how many years they've been in law enforcement?
Yeah, there is further breakdowns in this, and also the study that's going on now is even more in depth than this one. And as they got, not surprisingly, as they progressed through the career, the problems became more significant because of the trauma exposure, because of the cumulative trauma, and because of all the things they're trying to mitigate in their mind and their emotions. And that's, you have moral injury added in there, all of the things collectively that combine together to really put someone in a bad place if they don't have tools and skills to mitigate them. And we'll talk about that in a minute from our department's perspective. Do you think working in the public safety field has caused any of the listed conditions? So 4 out of 10 say yes, depression, 7 out of 10 say anxiety, almost 1 out of 5 say they've had a need for an antidepressant. This is a big problem for me, and it ties back into the being withdrawn and depressed, is the 40% reporting increased alcohol use, and then certainly more recently, 1 out of 10 saying increased pain medication use. We have not seen pain med issues arising in our agency, but there are agencies in the region. In fact, we have a speaker that we use at our agency, another agency who works at our agency. He had an injury, a work injury, went with prescribed opioids. In response to that injury, he could feel himself becoming dependent upon. This was before they were as well known as in town. He went to his doctor and said, I don't think this is good. I feel like I'm getting hooked on this stuff. And the doctor said, no, your body's just becoming more tolerant. We are going to increase your dosage. So he eventually ran out of his script and he decided to turn to alcohol. And he just got to a point where his wife said, either the booze goes or myself and the kids go. And luckily he was able to reach out for help. He is still employed with the agency and he's a productive member of his health and happy his family. His family is also healthy and happy. But we have not seen that, but I know of 2 significant issues in law enforcement in this region that resulted from pain medication use. So, things like this, anxiety, are going to play into the increased alcohol use, right? I'm jittery, I get home, I'm all jazzed up from whatever was going on my shift, I can't calm down, I drink a couple of drinks to go to bed, and we know that alcohol as a sleep aid, it's great to put you to sleep, it is not great to keep you asleep. So you never get into that deep state sleep that you need to really recover mentally and emotionally from whatever's going on. And we now know, particularly in your 40s, if you are deprived of deep sleep, there are some ties now to cognitive decline as you get older, because the brain that's kind of the, for lack of a better term, like the cleaning cycle of your brain occurs when you're sleeping. So lack of appropriate rest when you're younger and suffering from these things can lead to different problems. So here we go right here. So what are officers experiencing from this trauma exposure? Over 1 in 4 are saying flashbacks or nightmares. Almost 7 in 10 are saying lack of sleep. 1 out of 5 are trying to avoid critical reminders of the event. And I do that myself when it comes to my buddy's death. Feeling hypervigilant or overly watchful, sudden noises, any type of kind of startle response would fall into the hypervigilant category. And then again, shutting down or being withdrawn. And Kevin Gilmartin in that book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, which is the red and white, that's kind of a seminal book on law enforcement wellness, that he talks a lot about officers coming home. He talks about them getting into their chair and turning on the TV and just kind of blanking out. So they get home and they just want to shut down. They don't want any further contact with other humans at that point. They want to decompress. And obviously that's not helpful and conducive to a strong marital or relationship with your family or your neighbors, right? If I just want to sit in my chair and stare at the TV, my spouse is not going to be very excited about that. My kids are not going to be very excited about that. And I'm not interacting with my neighbors in my community in an effective manner. And we also know from books like the Blue Zones and other studies that have gone on, one of the primary foundations of long-term functional health is family and social networks. So if we're pulling away from those networks, we're gonna suffer down the road.
Okay.
Yep. If you wanted help, but you did not seek it, what prevented you from seeking it? So almost 1 in 3 say there was a stigma, they felt weak or embarrassed. We hear that a lot in this profession, right? You're dealing with people who are the alpha, the proverbial alpha male, alpha females. They're very strong. We do not seek help. We provide help. So we are supposed to be the helpers. We are not supposed to be reaching out to others. This goes back to the 8% that we talked about on Michelle Lilly's study. So 32% are saying that work might find out their concern that if they go to a therapist, that somehow that information is going to get brought back to work and they're going to suffer some type of consequences or retribution. 7%, I couldn't find the help I needed. The example I would use for that, I have a friend in another agency who's been in multiple shootings. He went to a clinician to get assistance. He began to describe to the clinician what had happened to him and what he had been through. The clinician began to cry based upon what was described to them. And the officer had to time out the clinical session and go around to the therapist's computer and on her desktop pull up some response resources for her that he thought would be helpful. So you have an officer who's already reluctant to get help, right? Because we're Superman, we all have the S on our chest. This individual goes to get help. It is an absolute train wreck. And they are now not going to be super excited about going to get help in the future. And I'm not going to go tell my buddy Tosh, who was like, hey, I've kind of been having a tough time. Like, whatever you do not go to a therapist, because I went to one last week and it was not effective. It was very problematic. It made things worse. So, making sure we have resources that we help to the officer, and I'll talk about some of that in a few minutes. Other people told me not to. Luckily, that number is only 2% because I like to have a conversation with those 2% of the people who had told someone not to do anything. One, to handle on our own, right? We help others. We don't ask for help, so we're going to take care of ourselves. And lastly, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I call that the comparative trauma problem. So I'm going to say, geez, Latasha's been in 2 shootings and I only saw a really bad car accident. So my trauma's not that bad. Latasha's the one who really has had a hard time, not me. So I'm not a big deal. I'm just going to keep going through my life. And I don't realize that everything's relative. Again, I mentioned before, like, what may be very traumatic for me may not affect Wayne at all. And what may be very problematic for Wayne may not impact me at all. And the example I usually use is kids. So I don't have kids. So for me, if I go on a call that involves something harmful to children, I think we all have an inherent need to protect and look out for children and elderly and those who need protecting. So I think we all have that inherent desire in us. But I do think that people who are parents and have children of their own are more significantly impacted by calls that involve kids, and I think that makes sense, right? So if Wayne goes on a call with kids, that may really impact him because he has kids, whereas Dave may not be as impacted. But there may be another call that I'm involved with about suicide, and I know that my buddy died by suicide, and it's very similar in circumstance of that, and that's more upsetting to me than Wayne, who didn't have that experience. So just being mindful of, if we're supervisors, the people that work for us, or Latasha does a very good job during OPR investigations of kind of peeling back the onion a little bit. So if there's something going on besides just the immediate policy violation or problem, that we deal that. We, dole out discipline if it's needed, but we also address any underlying issues so that this person is not put at further risk either to themselves or to other people. This is pretty disturbing. So have you ever known a coworker who has had suicidal thoughts? So over 1/3 say yes. And I was surprised in our department was not higher, because we had an officer immediately prior to the survey who went through almost the entire department and talked about the experience he had had. His name is Adam Stone. He's very open, so I'm not talking out of school. He just retired after a full 32-year career. He was a motorcycle officer for most of his career. He was a child sexual abuse victim as a teenager over multiple summers at camp. He then went on to be a police officer, and after 9/11, he noticed he began having emotional responses to things that were not normal for him. And the example he always uses, he's like, I'd be driving down my road on my motorcycle, and like kind of a sad song would come on the radio, and as he describes it, this strange liquid began coming out of my eyes that I wasn't quite sure what it was or what was going on. And he sought help. He became suicidal after a certain amount of time. He luckily reached out for help during the moment of clarity and was able to get help and return to work and be very, effective in the rest of his career. So that, I would think the numbers of it to our agency would have been higher, but still over 1 in 3 is pretty significant number. Right? If we extrapolate that across agencies, that's a lot of officers and other first responders who are walking around knowing that they have a coworker who's committed suicide. And then it goes to that person. Have you ever had? So 14%, that's a pretty high number. If we do the math of, a capacity of 376 officers or across the region collectively, the number of first responders that is, That's a lot of people. And then we overlay the other data with people who don't want to seek help or don't feel they're going to be supported by their employer, or they just want to handle it on their own, or someone else has told them, no, don't go get help. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. We have a lot of people who may be in jeopardy if they're not put in the right space to get the assistance that they need.
You think that might be underreported because it shows the police are less than the?
Yes.
You know.
I think that number is going to be reported across the board there. And again, the numbers that we have for the suicides that are the law enforcement suicides that report of fire service suicides report, those numbers are believed to be underreported by as much as 40%, the actual individuals who complete suicide. So I would think this number would probably be a similar underreporting. And again, that's probably due to concern that it's going to get back to the employer. I feel like a wimp if I say I was thinking about killing myself, and those types of things. So all collectively plays back into the middle where we need to keep ourselves together. How many hours of sleep? So I do this presentation on my advice from my department. He always likes to joke. He says, I don't know who this 2% is that gets the 8 hours. He's like, that must be everyone who's like a captain or above because they're the ones who at night. So you'll notice the midpoint again here is 5 to 6 hours, right? That's where most people are getting. So we know that, you know, for 1 or 2 nights, that's fine, right? I can make it through 5 or 6 hours. A lot of people are like, man, I sleep 5 or 6 hours for weeks and months at a time. And all of the studies that they're doing now are saying that is tremendously bad for your health, right? And what I would say is we know for officers, there's restrictions on pilots, truck drivers, all of these other occupations as to how long they can be awake before they continue on doing what they do for a profession. We have a departmental policy of 17 hours, unless there's an operational need and that can be overridden and that can occur. But again, you're talking about, you know, police officers and dispatchers and firefighters who are making significant decisions, whether investigative decisions, use of force decisions, any of these critical thinking skills that they need to exercise. And when they are sleep deprived, those are compromised. So really making sure that officers, they are aware of that, the jeopardy that poses. Supervisors are aware of their officers who are working for them, who are either have to work a lot of overtime due to an operational necessity over a short period of time, or who elect to work a lot of overtime, and really making sure that we're on the ball as far as that stuff. Because the people who are, 13% are sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. That's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Hold on one second. Mr. DeFronte, did you want to speak?
I don't, I'll just be really brief. We finished our board meeting. I wanted to come down to thank the board and thank you so much to our police leadership who are here, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. It's very formal, I know. But I just did want to come down to thank you all for what you're doing. I was in a Zoom meeting last night where the possibility of coming to the Oversight Board was raised, and it's just a venue that's very important. And I know my guess is we're 60 or so % down the road towards the full training, which you may not have known would be quite as robust as it is, but it's an indication of how important the work is. I'm so eager to get through this phase, and I know you are too, but it's an indication of how important the work is that our entire police leadership is here, and I appreciate that. It's coming. I know it's, we're all eager to get there, but I'm really grateful for everyone being here. You've got an open door. I know Graham is available, Christian and I are available, and I know he came down last time. But thanks to you, Mami, and to everyone for the chance to be here. I don't need to go on longer than that. I'll stay and continue to listen. I will also, most nights nowadays, I don't really see my wife or dog till after 10. So I'm going to try and slide out in a few minutes, but I do want to sit and listen for a bit and wanted to really emphasize that what you're doing is super important. And that goes for both the board as well as our police department, because I do go to sleep a fair number of nights thinking that the world could be quite different when I wake up in the morning if something happened. And so both things are true. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so kind of follow, so extension of the mental health, we're going to go talk about some physical health real quick. So Public Safety Cardiac Foundation, group out of Texas, they did a study, they published it about 10 years ago, and they compared law enforcement cardiac events with the general population. So average age of a patient with heart attacks in a law enforcement population, they're 49 years old, citizens are 65 years old. So significant discrepancy there. I would say I'd be a little mindful of those stats because the population you're examining in law enforcement is going to be inherently younger because we don't have a lot of 65-year-old police officers running around, but they're still using a smaller sample. So just be mindful of that. The number of heart attacks that occur under the age of 45 in law enforcement is 45%, and the general population is 7%. That is significant because those are drawing many issues there. And probably the most alarming to me is the average life expectancy of a law enforcement officer is 57 years and a citizen is 77 years. Now, some of them, yes, it's terrible. And part of that is obviously due to some officers are killed young, right? Unfortunately. But there are a lot of, and we know, I just got notifications of 2 officers in the past 2 weeks who passed away. One was a little older, but one was just, I just turned 50, one was about 5 or 8 years older than I am. So he falls right in that 57-year expectancy. And some of that is due to the stressors. We know, again, a lot of this is kind of new data information, but if you live in a state of constant inflammation, and constant high levels of cortisol in your body, those are very compromising to your systems. And over time, the detrimental effect of that is significant and can lead to cardiac events, cancers, and a whole host of other issues that may not be fatal, but are certainly not going to lend themselves to great longevity. So Eric Golnick, great guy, CEO of a group called Forge VFR Healthcare. They're one of our outside external mental health providers. So Eric is a former naval officer, and he suffered PTSD due to some of his deployments, as well as witnessing one of his sailors die by suicide in front of him by jumping off the bridge of his ship onto a dry dock. Eric went to seek mental health assistance after he left the service and could not find a capable therapist who could assist him. So his response to that was to create his own healthcare company to provide first responder and veteran-specific services, and that's actually what VFR stands for, is veteran and first responder. So we have done a lot of stuff. Eric has been very helpful as we've navigated and we do some of our formative processes in getting our wellness program designed and developed. But he made a statement a couple of years ago when I was talking with him, is, what we are doing now is obviously not working, right? We still see high rates of suicide in law enforcement, first responders, and the veteran population. So whatever it is that we're doing now is not effective. So we need to continue to research and develop successful strategies and mitigations to help officers. And a lot of our officers are veterans, so they bring that experience with them into the first responder profession, giving them the skills, tools, and resources they need to help themselves when they end up in a bad place. Another, Jen Basham, she is a Fairfax County lieutenant. Her brother, Tony Basham, was a detective. He died by suicide in the back parking lot of the McLean station several years ago. And we had her speak at one of the presentations that I was involved in a few years ago. And one thing that she said really stuck out. So she had never participated in the presentation before. We asked her to be on the panel. She was very nervous about doing that. I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm like, just talk about how you feel and what happened. And as the questions come in, we'll help you answer them. So as she began speaking, it was always very difficult for her. She was very emotional. One thing she said was, why do we allow being okay to be acceptable? And her point was, if I just say, if someone, and we say it all the time, right? How are you doing? I'm okay. And she's like, if you're just okay and you get knocked down a peg, you're now not okay. But if you kind of hang out at good and you get knocked down a peg, you're still okay. But she's like, why wouldn't we strive for great? So we start at the highest possible capacity that we can have. So as we get knocked down, we're still in that good to okay zone. She's like, we allow ourselves to be just okay too much of the time, so that when we do end up in a compromised state, we have nowhere to fall. We're just already in a bad state. So that really stuck out with me, and it's something that I think we've really tried to do at the department with our wellness program is give people resources and things to get them up to that grade and keep them at least in good, so if they don't fall too far, we can't help them. So we're first responders, right? So we spend a lot of time in the response space. When something bad happens, we traditionally have offered the officer help after the fact, right? What we would consider to be the proverbial to the right of bang, right? To the right of boom. So we need to spend more time to the left of boom and giving the officers help and resources on the front end. So when they get to boom, they're a lot more able to manage it and handle it and get themselves through whatever it is they're dealing with, either whether it's a work-related issue or a personal issue. So we're really focusing more on the awareness and education and the prevention resilience piece. So we've kind of a unique program here in Arlington. I will say I've already been promoted to captain, so I'm not, being an apple polish or anything, but we're very lucky that we have the executive leadership in the department that we have, because if they do not support this stuff, it goes nowhere. And we provide support and assistance to a lot of other agencies where the executive staff does not support it. So they come to us to get the help they need, and luckily we have the capacity to do that because of the people that we have in place at the highest level. So the chief is very supportive of this. He has established the position that I'm in. It's been in existence for about 6 months now, and we meet every other week and go over everything that's going on in the program. And then in that gap period in between those meetings, he is, constantly asking for information or making sure that we have what we need and helping individual officers who may be struggling without getting into, quote unquote, into their business. So those officers don't feel imposed upon or that they're under the microscope, but they know that they're being supported. And we have had chiefs, including Chief Penn when he was just Deputy Chief Penn, reach out to officers who have been in inpatient programs for their mental health and told them, you're okay, your job's still here, we're not looking to fire you, we want you to get the help you need and come back to work when you're ready. So when you hear that from executive level leadership, that sends a very strong message that officer they can pass on to other officers, in informal settings. So we have a steering committee made up of representatives from all the agencies, public safety, police, fire, sheriff, and dispatch. We oversee a position called the Public Safety Wellness Coordinator. We currently have one in kind of a temporary capacity. We're gonna hire 2 full-time individuals for that. That is a mental health clinician who also oversees other aspects of wellness, which we'll get into here in a sec, and kind of manages and corrals all that. So we have 3 pillars of the program: physical fitness and nutrition, mental health and peer support, and financial planning and family preparedness. Under the mental health and peer support, we start really when they begin now. So they come in as recruits, we give them a presentation, we give them that book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by Kevin and Gil Martin, and then we give each of them 2 of these cards. Can I touch this? And these are from Give an Hour, and I gave these to you for your own use. So what I tell people is Give an Hour is a nonprofit. It provides no-cost services to veterans and family members suffering from either military service or results of a man-made or natural disaster. And this was called the 5 Signs campaign. So what I tell people is if you look in the mirror and you see one of these faces looking back at you on a regular basis, it's a good idea to go talk to somebody. And also, if I'm hanging out with Latasha and every day I go talk to Latasha, this is the face Latasha's giving me every time I talk to her, then I need to tell her, hey, it would probably be a good idea for you to talk to someone. And then on the other side, there are just some basic kind of self-care tips. So it's a great little reminder for yourself. And I give the officers 2 cards. I tell them to keep one in their pocket for themselves and to have a conversation with someone else that they care about and give them that card. So to kind of create that network of people who are willing to support and help each other when times are down. So we give out that card. We talk about the employee assistance program. We talk about peer support and other resources. And then we have ongoing education throughout their career. So we're giving ongoing presentations on substance abuse, on suicide awareness and prevention, and many of those involve actual first responders from this area. So you have a live speaker, we have a video presentation that we do, and then you'll have a live speaker from the video who talks about their battles with substance abuse, their mental health struggles, and how they've sought help and are able to come back to work. So people understand there's no reason to be leery of getting help. You're not going to get fired. No one's going to think you're a wimp. And the agency welcomes you back. You don't get thrown off the island. You don't get put on the proverbial rubber gun squad. We don't put you in a corner somewhere and with a little school desk and a notebook and tell you to count staples or something. We bring you back into the fold, right? Make sure you're okay. And the big thing is just increasing recognition by officers and supervisors. So creating, I tell people, hopefully no one in this room ever experiences some type of significant mental health or emotional health struggle or substance use issue, either for themselves or family. But, isn't necessarily geared towards the officers or the people here tonight. It could be someone that you know who's going through this, and creating that awareness so that you're able to tell them, hey, I'm here to, I will help you. I'll help you find help, and it would be a good idea for you to get help. And we have seen that repeatedly over the past couple of years. We've had officers on their own say that they need help. And I think more significantly, I've had officers come to me in my peer support role and say, hey, I'm concerned about John Smith or Mary Jones. Will you please talk to them and see if they're okay? And actually telling Black veteran on their fellow officers that they're concerned about, and then we engage that officer and direct them to another resources or prevention and resilience. So we have a bunch of different programs from yoga. We have a no-cost equine program that was established out in Great Falls with a nonprofit out there. We offer resilience training. We have some VR headsets with some software, stress management. We offer fitness and nutrition education, a variety of wellness events. We have an in-house comfort dog, Brooks. He's fantastic. And then we have a wellness portal that's online now. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then on the response end, the real goal is to create as many options for people as possible. So maybe someone's comfortable going to our employee assistance program in the county, maybe they're not. They want to go to an external provider, so we have to have an external provider available to them. Maybe they are very faith-based, so we want to have a chaplain available that they can speak to if they're a faith-based person. So giving them as many doorways as possible that they could go through to access assistance when needed, not limiting them to one option that they may not be comfortable with or feel good about using. I call it the T-test on the bottom left there. So when we're looking at resources, they have to be trusted, effective, and available. So myself or someone that I know has to tell me, I've used this resource and this person is legit. This person is not going to start crying when you talk to them about their struggles. It has to be effective. So are we getting the results that we want from the people that we send to the program? So I want to end up with officers who need assistance, getting the assistance they need, getting back to work. Is that what we're seeing when we refer to this provider? And lastly, they need to be available. Example is for that, we got a call from another agency during COVID. The employee in their agency was suicidal. The person was on peer support that they came to. We got the immediate situation stabilized. We said get a supervisor involved. That started going down a positive pathway, and then I got a call back and they said, look, the provider that they have been referred to is not located close to where they live, is not located close to where they work, and has no availability for 8 weeks. And so then that's not a resource, because in 8 weeks, this person could be dead in 8 weeks. Like that's the mental status that they're at right now. So we need to get them assistance far sooner than 8 weeks. So we have developed a program at Virginia Hospital Center for first responders. We called them and they got the person the next morning so that they could evaluate them and get them to the appropriate care. And then you've heard me refer to peer support. So peer support is a specially trained group of officers. We have an accredited team. Virginia has an accreditation standard at the state level, and they have legislation at the state level that's been around for a while that provides confidentiality to communications with officers and members of the peer support team with reasonable exceptions. So if an officer comes to me and says they're suicidal, they're homicidal, they're not able to take care of themselves, there's elder abuse or child abuse or something like that involved, that is not confidential. They come in and they tell me they lied about an internal affairs investigation, that's not confidential. But if they're talking to me about their response to a traumatic incident or what's going on at home or something like that, that cannot be subpoenaed, I cannot be deposed about it, and I cannot be required to testify. That all remains confidential, almost as if you were talking with a counselor. So that's been very effective. So we are accredited. We just got reaccredited for another 3 years. So our next period won't end until 2025. and need help with any of the stuff that's needed there. So we can, people can self-refer, they can peer refer, they can supervisor refer. We're not clinicians, but we can basically provide that kind of body level support to, and most of the time I tell people what I do is I listen and then I refer them to someone who can really help them. And I always tell them, I will listen to you as long as you want to talk to me, but if you're talking to me for this long, it's probably better that you talk to someone who's a little bit more training experience than I do, and I'm happy to facilitate all that for you if you need me to. Sometimes people do it on their own, sometimes people will want you to make the call, and then you can get them to it. And we help other agencies, Capitol Police, we spent a lot of time in after January 6th and after Billy Evans killed the barricade. We spent about 4 months over there in total. We helped Virginia Beach after the mass shooting, and we helped Winchester with an officer death that they had. Just those are just a few of the examples from recent years that we've been able to help other agencies.
That's really impressive.
Thank you. And then, so what do we specifically have? You know, so we're very lucky. We're partnered with a behavioral health nonprofit right now based out of Reno, Nevada. It's called the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health. They have a consultant who lives locally. He cold called the chief's office about 2 years ago. We connected with him, and what they have done through county board level approval is they have provided services and programs to the tune of several $100,000 to create research and create a template or a model for a first responder, public safety based behavioral wellness program. So they're paying for services and resources and programs for us to utilize, and they're doing parallel to that, they're conducting research. So at the end of their research period, they'll be able to say, here are the things that we found that officers enjoyed, that officers found to be effective, that agencies found to be helpful. And so if it means you were to cold call them and say, you know, we want to do a wellness program, what does that look like? They can provide some options to those agencies. So they have provided for us an on-site trainer every Wednesday for a full day. They provide both now on-site and virtual health coaching for 8 hours a week. For mental health and peer support, we have our employee assistance program. We have our public safety wellness coordinator, who is affectionately known as Dr. Lisa. In the agency, we have the program at Virginia Hospital Center. We have several private providers, and we have nonprofits that we work with for veterans. And then we have the accredited peer support team. For financial planning, the county partners with Voya, and we're looking at partnering probably through our union with a couple of other providers, one local, one farther away, who can provide officers with some financial guidance, kind of a career-based map as to what they need to think about throughout their career. We provide family instructions now for the recruits immediately after they graduate. The families come into a separate room during a lull in the festivities as they're graduating, and we provide them some information on what they may see in their loved one as they progress throughout their career, and some information on resources that are available, because frequently family members will see stuff that we don't, right? The person comes to work, they show us what they want to show us, but at home they're a little more not quite as guarded, and their family gets to see the real, the real Dave Judah, what's going on that maybe they don't get to see at work. And then other resources, I mentioned the Cummings Foundation, they've created a web portal for us. And when I said the equine program with Me Up, so that started through a grant that we were able to get through the state, and now that program is funded by private donations. So they have created a first responder program that's region-wide for any first responder who wants to go. It's 2 hours every Tuesday. They go out, they don't have to gallop around like the Lone Ranger or anything on the horse. They can just groom the horse, they can spend time with the horse in the corral, they can walk the horse around on lead, they can walk the horse around not on lead, and it's just a beautiful setting. It's very, you kind of feel like you're out in the middle of Kentucky or Tennessee, and you're 25 minutes from the police station. So that's no cost to the agency or the county. You just go out there, you sign up, and a lot of state police have used it, metropolitan airports have used it, fire departments have used it. So it's getting to be more highly utilized than it was.
That's the place out on Georgetown Pike.
100%, yep, right on there, yep. That was found because my sergeant, Greg Cyrianek, and I climbed. We were rock climbing at Great Falls, and we were done. It was a nice day. He's like, you want to know what we should do? We should go get ice cream at Great Falls Creamery. So we were driving down Georgetown Pike to get ice cream, and on the right-hand side was Lift Me Up, and I just remember the name and looked them up and called them, and they started talking to us about this program and were very receptive to working on it. So that happened because someone wanted to get ice cream.
I've always driven by and wondered what it is. So.
Yeah, they work with stroke victims, they work with children who have significant physical disabilities, they work with veterans. Yeah, they work with a bunch of different groups. And that is my contact info, and I also gave a business card to each one of you, so if you have any further questions or something comes up, or you know a first responder who you think we may be able to help, please call them.
All right, that is it for this part.
Thank you so much.
And all the time and effort you put into that, it's really impressive. So we're actually, well, slightly ahead of schedule. So if there are no more questions, or,
Can I just have one question for anybody, David, the chief? So, what other things, this is a national problem, it's not it's no mental health, things like that, but the one stat that you said was a little bit disturbing, it was like, was it 37% said they know of somebody?
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, that's a good stat to me, that there's communication occurring. I mean, you can look at it, it's not bad or it's not good, but there's encouragement in that
Yes.
people know. They know because it's not just, somebody's talking, so that's a good thing. What other things, hybrid work, people, and I know that you move people around within the agency, but are there any other tools, like I know in the Air Force what's happening with this, was they were letting people check out and go to other jobs and come back. Hey, you can come back if you want to, just to kind of get away from the fight, so to speak. But are there any other kind of things that, besides these two? And these are great tools, don't get me wrong, this is actually better than what I've seen other places. But what other kind of career things are there? Are there any check valves or things you can let people move, go around? I don't know, is there other
I
things?
was gonna say, so one thing that we have seen is we've had officers who've been through either specific traumatic incidents or have been exposed to cumulative trauma and just reach a point where being operational on the street in a patrol setting is very difficult for them, right? There are triggering events to them day to day, and they just get to a mental and emotional state where it's not probably a good idea for me to be in a patrol setting right now. And luckily, due to, I think, the culture and the flexibility that the chief has allowed, we are able to take those officers and put them in a modified assignment, kind of like what you're talking about. So, and the benefit in the police department, it's kind of like the military. There's so many different job functions that are available. We can put you in a setting that is not a patrol-based setting. We can give you a break. We can get you some mental health support, and then get you back, if it's appropriate, get you back to street duty. And if it's not appropriate, someone can go through the disability process and determine, are they permanently disabled due to trauma that they've been exposed to, and do they need to be removed, and kind of go down a retirement route. And we've had both of those outcomes happen. So I just think that I think having that flexibility is very important. And I was with the federal agency today, and they had just done that with one of their employees, and they're very excited. It was the first time they've been able to do that, and the employee was very happy to be able to be given that break. And I told them that's really good, because there are a lot of federal agencies, they just don't have a mechanism to do that, and they don't have like a landing spot. So we had an officer who was involved in a shooting a few years ago, and you usually have about 2 weeks off that you're given as administrative leave. I'll read that in the paper or see it on the news when it happens, and that's certainly something we do here. But for the guy with a family, that might be great. If Dave Giroux has just moved here from the Midwest, and I don't have any family or friend support in the area, and I'm sitting in my apartment by myself staring at the walls for 2 weeks, that's probably not the best setting for me to come out of that emotionally whole, right? So we were able, in this particular instance, the supervisor called me, and I think I was actually down in narcotics at the time, and said, hey, this, officer's having a tough time, and and I was like, well, do they want to be at home? No. And I said, well, why don't we just bring them down here to narcotics, which is a very, certainly not a forward, public facing assignment. They're all undercover guys, and they can work in an investigative capacity and with people they like and do interesting stuff, and then they can make it through their 2Ds. So you really kind of have to just be mindful and intentional about what you're doing in those particular settings, and be given the latitude and the flexibility to help those people. If you have a rigid structure, and I know the military, my dad is a career Navy guy, and very, rigid structures at some point, and there's reasons for that, right? And I certainly think there is for that police work too, but I think being more mindful of when we can be flexible to help people and get them back to a better state so they can provide the service that they want to provide. They're not looking to leave or not be in the community, or they want to be present and with their friends and doing work that they want to do. Like you were saying, they want to provide that service. They don't want to shy away from it. So.
Something else that comes to mind for me is we've had supervisors in the past, and we currently do it in CED, is where we mandate our officers meet with our counselors as a team. And so I separate it between supervisors and then new officers. So it's more of a safe, they feel even more comfortable talking just among their own peers and ranks, sitting down with somebody to talk about what's going on. And then they have a choice afterwards to have one-on-ones if they like. And so I give them that choice. We mandate that once a quarter. Now that's kind of challenging for every unit to do, and I get that because my unit's especially very small, so I can do it. But I actually stole that from another commander years ago who did it up in our criminal investigations division. But I find that to be very effective too. Because again, just a culture of policing where people may not want to just go out and reach out and ask for help.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again. This has really been terrific. I'll entertain a motion to stand in recess for 5 minutes. It's 8:00. Well, by the time we're done, it'll be 8:03. Let's say 8:08. Does anybody want to make that motion?
I move that we stand in recess till 8:08.
Anybody want a second? Fantastic. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Fantastic. Okay, so 8:08.
So my only concern is that the next part is the tour, so we're gonna be leaving the building.
Yes, and when we come back, we'll move into closed session. We've got to.
You have business to take care of as well?
No,
No,
we
so-
just have to, it's just a formal, we have to actually say it
Okay.
They
in
have
an
to,
assertive way.
we'll come back from recess, motion goes.
And then we'll take a motion and.
So can we leave? We're gonna go for a tour.
My point was that.
Oh, we are coming back.
Oh.
That's where they're
Have to come back. So, we can just go straight into closed session.
I think we're on a little bit of a break first.
Okay, and then we gotta come back here,
Close.
and then we come back to closed session.
No, I don't think
We're happy to go to closed
So
session.
this is it. This is about tour. Yeah, but
And then some other business.
No, they have no other, so we're going to close and immediately.
Don't worry.
Be
So it's already come.
Fine, dude.
Okay, I got it now.
Virginia.
Than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was like.
I thought you were gonna.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, great.
And you've got the language. for
Yeah,
me?
you need to.
Yeah, I know it.
I'll pull it.
Are we good? Okay, so, recess is ended, and the meeting will come to order. It's 8:13. We're moving to closed session, so I move that in a closed meeting for the purposes of receiving training from the Arlington County Police Department as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A19. For briefings by law enforcement officials concerning responses to threats to public safety and for discussion of information subject to the exclusion in Virginia Code Section 2.2-3705.2, Subdivision 14 under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, conflict of interest, and other applicable laws concerning the board's duties and liabilities. So, moving into closed session, right?
Is there a second? You have to-
We do have to, okay.
Or you have to do the whole thing.
I second the motion.
Anybody?
Or-
No, we did the motion, okay.
You read the motion, he just second.
We're gonna get this right one of these days. All in favor?
Has to be, it's a roll call vote. Sorry.
Okay, not a problem, I can do that. Okay, so,
Only members present.
got that. Gary Dean
Here,
and you agree, right?
I agree.
Go. David Smith,
Aye.
Julie Evans, is that Julie? Is that here?
Julie, are you there?
I have lost her. Anika Montgomery. Aye. You agree to go into closed session. And you don't get to vote. I'm so sorry.
So if you don't have a
Zero.
physical
Okay.
quorum, is that a problem?
So that's
So go
4-0,
to-
yeah. We good?
No idea if quorum's a problem for this,
But it's not a meeting. It's a training.
but it is a meeting. You're receiving training at the meeting. It is a public meeting.
Okay.
What
so-
is that it's a vote to do something, so
Oh, I
it's an
see.
action.
What happens
It is a
now?
vote to enter closed session. I don't know if
Oh, because we lost Julie.
Closed session.
Well, Julie's not physically here, so she doesn't
She
count for the
doesn't-
quorum.
that's right, she doesn't count.
Okay, so that means we should be good.
Or
if she
not.
doesn't count, well, she doesn't count towards. So I'm gonna, I'll just make the executive decision sort of that we're fine. Because we're not going to postpone this. And if it ends up, I mean, we'll follow the normal procedure and certify that, no rules were broken. And if it ends up that rules were broken and someone recalls on it, which I don't think anyone is paying attention to. If that were to happen,
Oh,
we'll figure it out.
We have enough witnesses.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, so we are going to leave and not come back.
You are going to come back on the record, though,
Yes.
um,
From
Over
here.
there, from
in,
over there.
in person.
So
at
physically,
PD
we're not gonna come
headquarters.
back here, but
Okay.
we do have to come back into session in order to close out. the meeting.
Close.
Yeah.
Got it.
Good enough?
Our leaders are awaiting us.
Okay. And you're coming with me, Grant, because you have my language, right? Or are you?
Oh,
not
yeah,
coming
yeah.
with us? Oh, but you said you would.
Want me to check?